Now, they were watching television, and Otto should have been watching as well with them, but he couldn't, and I'll tell you why. First of all, here's their television set. The thing is, it was only a very old television set, and it worked rather badly. Sometimes it looked as though it was snowing, and sometimes it made the people all wobbly, and sometimes it did that thing where the feet come in the top and the man's head appears at the bottom. In fact, there was only one way in which they could make it work properly, and that was
Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 49 of
Round the Archives.
Lots to fit in
Yes.
today. So
Bumper issue.
We won't hang about too long.
No.
But we ought to plug some of the things we've been doing since
Yes.
we last spoke.
Yes.
We've released more in conversations,
We
haven't
have,
we?
yes.
We've done a fair bit for the Shy Life podcast.
We have.
And we've made our return appearance on Looks Unfamiliar.
We have indeed.
Tim
Yes.
Worthington's wonderful show. So check that out as well.
Yes.
But to kick off, Martin Holmes tells us a story of
Jackanory.
Jackanory, Jackanory. Jackanory.
Hello. Once upon a time, the BBC, a television company that you may have heard of, created a series that they called Jackanory. This involved celebrities or actors or personalities of the day reading stories to little boys and girls across the nation so they could actually hear the books that they might like. And this show lasted for more than 30 years. 30 years on television, and even came back a bit later, or it wasn't as good. Basically, the reader would read a story, sometimes over 5 nights, but sometimes different stories on the 5 nights, and they would go from Monday to Friday, and the episodes would be about 15 minutes long, and the stories would be illustrated, and at the beginning of the programme there was a very familiar theme tune, and there was a kaleidoscope effect using a nice image that had something to do with the programme. This programme lasted for 31 years, and there were over 3,500 episodes, often with some of the finest performers of their generation, and over 2,000 of those are now missing. They've been thrown away. And let's face it, some of us believe you should never throw anything away. One little boy, a very long time ago, used to sit and watch Jackanory, and every so often there was a gentleman who appeared on Jackanory called Mr. Quentin Blake. Now, some of his episodes have actually managed to survive, but Mr. Quentin Blake was an artist, and he used to illustrate children's stories, and he used to write children's stories. But the stories he would tell on Jackanory involved him walking along a wall of paper and using a black marker pen to draw the stories as he went along. And I found that an absolute miracle when I was a little boy, and that's kind of possibly why I grew up to be an artist myself. He would scribble the stories about a character called Lester, who was a kind of dinosaur, and his friend Otto. And I couldn't remember the other character who often featured in it, but when I watched an episode, because Andrew and Lisa sent me one, it was a character called Flap-Eared Laura. So I became very interested in drawing because I thought this was a miracle. He would literally draw the story as the programme went along, and this seemed miraculous. And the adventures that Lester and his friends had were amazing to me as a small boy. Now, the thing about Jackanory was it was presented by lots and lots of people that you will have heard of, including Denham Elliott and Judi Dench and Martin Jarvis and Ian McKellen and Paul McGann and Earl Cameron and Peter Davison and Angus Deaton and Jan Francis and Molly Sugden and Elaine Stritch and Margaret Rutherford and Peter Sellers and Miranda Richardson and Trevor Martin and George Melly and Spike Milligan and Richard Bryars and Kathy Burke and Ed Bishop and Tom Baker and Floella Benjamin and Joss Ackland and Rupert Everett and Harry Fowler and Edward Fox and Stratford Johns and James Robertson Justice and Arthur Lowe and Joanna Lumley and Art Malik and Bob Roberts and Ted Ray. And why did they throw them all away? Well, they didn't throw them all away. That's lucky for us that some of them still exist. But nevertheless, one generation and then another generation, and probably several generations, were introduced to reading by listening and watching Jackanory every night of the week after school. And as a way of getting people to read and engage with storytelling and books, it really was a fabulous, fabulous programme. And we really, really, really would love to see more of it. Characters like Agaton Sachs, characters like Lester, the Matilda books by Roald Dahl, all featured, and they were all astonishingly good. There was a character called Little Nose, and the voice of the reader, John Grant, just shaped a generation. Some people were kind of alarmed by it. But Michael Palin wrote, John Pertwee, Patrick Moore, Lee Montague. There were so many people, and it is astonishing, really, that so few of them have survived. And I think it's awful. But nevertheless, Jackanory was a fabulous, fabulous programme. And if you can, find some time to sit down and be embraced by the phenomenon that is Jackanory. Thank you. Goodbye.
Jackanory.
Celia Johnson will be back in Jackanory tomorrow at the same time with another story about Baba. Now it's time for Blue Peter, 5 to 5.
Many thanks to Martin for doing that.
Yes, thank you, Martin.
Yeah, I was looking at the list of missing Jackanories, and there's some great losses there.
Yes.
I'd really like to see the Geoffrey Belden one from 1974 where he reads Wurzel Gummidge again.
Yes.
Yeah, giving you a Belden Gummidge connection 5 years before.
Yeah.
You know, before the one that we know about.
Or he's the Crowman.
I'd love Jackanory to be shown on BritBox or somewhere like that.
Might actually get BritBox then.
Yeah.
If we have something like that.
Well, I don't see it being too difficult because you've only got like one actor to negotiate with, haven't you? Really?
Yeah, but there's a lot of it, isn't there?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on now, we're going to do part 1 of our look at
Crown Court.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
And welcome to the Crown Court. We've done a bit of Crown Court recently.
We have,
haven't we?
yes.
Yeah.
I rediscovered 2 of the volumes, and we've sort of had a bit of a binge watch.
Yeah. Today, and we're going to split this over a 3-part article.
Yes, just to make you stay to the end of the episode.
Indeed. We're looking at Crown Court Volume 5 from Network, with the 3-part story, The Most Expensive Steak in the World, Da Costa versus McIver.
Yes.
And the blurb says, Argentinian ranger. He's a ranger, or is he a rancher?
I think they do call it ranger, but yeah, he's a rancher. He owns
a ranger's something in Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, yes, it's something in other things as well.
Argentinian, I'm going to say rancher.
Okay.
Senor Da Costa is suing Colonel McIver for 65,000 guineas after the latter allegedly reneged on a verbal agreement to rig an auction at Fulchester Bull Sales, starring Ronald Rad Duncan Lamont and James Copeland, written by David Fisher, directed by Wojtek, original transmission 21st to 23rd November 1973. What do you think of this so far then?
It's one we've seen before.
Yes.
And I remember quite enjoying it because it's quite a light one.
Yeah.
There's no sort of, obviously it's a civil case, not a criminal case.
Yeah.
So there's no murders or anything like that. But yeah, it's quite amusing.
So Judge is William Mervyn.
Yes, we have William Mervyn.
As the Honourable Mr. Justice Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got Richard Wilson and John Alkin.
Yes.
As the QCs, haven't you?
QCs, yes. John Alkin's the plaintiff's QC, because that means he's the one bringing the case.
Yeah.
And Richard Wilson is the defendant.
Yeah, so basically Ronald Rad
Yeah.
playing an Argentinian.
Yeah.
Do you think he gets away with that?
Just about. I would point out actually that John Alkin isn't a QC.
No.
Barry Dealey's not a QC.
No, what is he then?
He's whatever then. He's a barrister,
Yeah.
but he's not a QC, which means he hasn't taken the silk.
Yeah. Okay. So Ronald Rad's come in his best sort of check jacket.
Yeah, it's a very
he?
loud 70s check jacket, isn't it? So yeah.
And he's got being sued by. He's suing. That's right. He's suing James Copeland.
Yes.
Who's come in his best whiskers.
He has. Yeah. This. I'd like to know if they're real or false.
They look a bit false.
They do look a little bit false.
They're a little bit OTT.
Yeah. It's
I have to say the jury in this episode, they're not that great.
No.
The jury's a bit disappointing.
Yeah, sometimes the jury, you get one in there that's sort of
There's a woman in a sort of in a dress. There's an oldish lady. She's about the best one.
Yeah.
But there's no real sights, is there?
No, there's no sort of long-haired,
Yeah.
brightly coloured shirt wearing people.
And we said it's directed by Wojtek.
Wojtek, yes.
There's a really weird shot from the back of the jury across the set, and I don't know whether they're just accidentally picking up the studio lighting.
Yeah.
Or whether it's an intentionally arty shot. I genuinely don't know.
It looked like sort of it had a sort of halo on it. Like
that's
because
that's because you're getting the studio light. Yeah, and it's unusual to use that camera position.
Can't use that too much. You burn that camera lens out.
Yeah, and maybe they've just jacked the camera up a bit too much. But yeah, we get the we get the sort of layout of the storyline, don't we? So this ball sort of changed hands, didn't it? And then it proved to be infertile.
Yes, it couldn't service the case.
Yeah, and I love the sort of exchanges between Richard Wilson and William Mervyn about the sort of biology of all this. Yeah. And Richard Wilson gets to say some quite biological words for the time slot.
Yeah,
doesn't he?
I wonder whether he got the script and he was like, oh, goodness sake, how do you say that word?
I'm not that. I'm thinking of the saucy words that he has to say. Yeah. He has to say some rude words.
He does, yeah, because it's on sort of
lunchtime-ish. Yeah.
But then Crunkle doesn't hold back for this sort of thing because, there are ones that... There was one we watched the other week which was about sort of wife swapping. Yeah. Which is a bit sort of much for this time of day as well.
There's some words that we won't repeat because they're a bit sort of racist,
very much of their time.
Yeah.
Racist or just discriminatory.
Yeah, but I do like the word rapscallion.
Rapscallion is a great word.
I had to write down rapscallion.
Yes. We should get rapscallion in more sort of wider use.
Yeah. We should say about William Mervyn that he's in black, isn't he? Black and dark blue.
Black and dark blue.
Normally he's in red, but you said that's for criminal cases.
Yeah, I think red is for criminal cases and black is for civil.
This is a civil one, yeah. I mean, the whole thing about judges' robes
is terribly complicated. Because different circuits have different colours.
Yeah. I like the way there's a suggestion that bulls have psychological problems too.
Yeah, he looks very, very... They had what?
That's the end of part one advert break cliffhanger, isn't it? Yeah. But apparently some bulls suffer from shyness, don't they? And I like the way the camera just suddenly picks up Milton Johns sitting there.
Sort of grinning.
And that's what happens a lot with Crown Court, because everybody has to sort of be there, don't they?
Yes.
And even if you don't necessarily get much to say in an episode, you've got to be sat on the bench, and the camera will just drift across. Oh, there's Milton Johns. What's he doing there? But yeah, he turns out to be the bidding agent, doesn't he?
No, he's another cattle agent.
Yeah.
But Ronald Rad's character
got him to bid
against him so they could push the price up.
And you know what I was thinking of? I was thinking of Captain Mannering and Pike bidding for the orange.
Yeah.
But again, we're filling in Fulchester here.
Yes. Fulchester is... I don't know how big Fulchester is.
Fulchester's infinite.
Yeah, it's like as big as London. Because they keep adding extra bits because it's got a dog track and it's got a marina and it's got a bull sale.
Now it's got a bull market and a bull show. Yeah. And I like the fact we name one of the pubs, which is the Salutation.
Salutation.
That's a good name for a pub.
It's a good name for a pub. You don't get names like that anymore.
Yeah, I really want to see somebody draw a map of Fulchester as to where all these things are.
You'd have to do it in areas because, I say, it's infinite.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so we're very much sort of setting the case up in part one, aren't we? Mm-hmm. So we can't really sort of go too much into the ins and outs of it here. Mm-hmm. But what do you think of it so far then?
Yeah, it's fun. It's a typical David Fisher,
slightly odd
episode. Yeah. He doesn't write normal episodes, David Fisher.
No,
which is good because you'd want something a little bit different, don't you? But yeah, it's interesting. At this precise moment, because I can't remember what the verdict is.
I have no idea.
I don't know whose side I'm on.
All right. But that's the beauty of the writing, isn't it? That often your sort of sympathies will back and forth as things come to light.
Yes.
But then that's how it would be if you were sat there in the jury, isn't it? Yeah. You might go in, on the first day with one opinion, but that might change during the course of the thing.
And then change again. Yeah. By the end of it.
So that's where the sort of cleverness in the writing sort of comes across. So I don't know at the moment what I think. Mm-hmm. No. And we shall work that out over the next 2 episodes. Mm-hmm. So anything else to say, or should we crack on with part 2?
I think we'll crack on with part 2. Okay. I would say, if you've never seen Crown Court, do seek it out because it is great fun. There are some slightly grimmer episodes, but there are plenty of fun ones along the way, and they're usually written by David Fisher.
Yeah. Well, Andrew and Lisa will continue the case when Round the Archives returns to the Crown Court later.
The case of DeCosta against McKeever will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.
Today's story, Tucker's Countryside, was adapted for Jackanory by Paul Stone.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for helping with that.
That's okay. Thank you, Andrew.
That article will be sprinkled through the rest of the issue.
Yes, to make you keep on listening.
But now we convert ourselves to 525 lines again.
Okay.
As Toppie Smellie of the Smellcast returns to look at...
The Magician.
Hello there, Around the Archives. Lisa and Andrew. It's me, Toppie Smellie. I want to tell you about a very obscure American television series from the early 70s. Now, I gotta tell you, this TV series was right up my alley because as a kid in 1974, when this series debuted, I was something of an amateur magician. Yeah, I was one of those weird kids that did magic at birthday parties. So, when I discovered the show in 1974, midway through its run, well, I took right to it, and I've remembered it ever since. I'm talking about the 1-hour drama adventure called The Magician. The Magician was portrayed by American TV star Bill Bixby, who already had 2 successful television series under his belt. Bill Bixby starred in My Favorite Martian from 1963 to 1966 on CBS television. My Favorite Martian was one of those wacky sitcoms that followed the kind of plot lines that you would have seen in Bewitched or I Dream of Jeannie, except in this case, the person doing all the magic and mischief was an alien from another planet, portrayed by Ray Ralston. And in this series, we find Bixby portraying a very likable bachelor. Bixby imbues the character with a winning personality, with Bixby himself developing a fine sense of comedic timing. After his successful run on My Favorite Martian, Bixby landed another role as a very likable bachelor. Debuting in 1969 and running until 1972, Bixby co-starred with the young actor Brandon Cruz. This was the highly successful half-hour sitcom called The Courtship of Eddie's Father.
People, let me tell you about my best friend. He's a warm-hearted person who loved me till the end.
The Courtship of Eddie's Father was based on a 1963 movie starring Glenn Ford by the same name, and in it, Bixby creates another very likable and sensitive leading male character. Most of the plot lines involved his son manipulating his father into meeting some new woman that the kid hoped would make his father happy and sweetly himself a new mother. Bixby and Cruz were terrific opposite each other and cemented Bixby once again as a sensitive, likable leading man. Well, a very likable man, a very sensitive man was exactly what the producers of The Magician were after. And they got him, Bill Bixby. In The Magician, Bill Bixby was cast as the millionaire playboy professional magician Anthony Tony Blake.
They offered me my old job back.
Did you take it?
Not a chance.
Good for you.
Please, Tony, I really can't accept this. And anyway, you did all the work.
But you did me a favor. You satisfied my professional curiosity.
Oh, but it doesn't seem fair.
But it is. Among magicians, professional curiosity is our strongest drive.
Oh?
Our second strongest drive.
Oh.
Oh, yes, our hero, Anthony Blake, was quite the ladies' man. And he would often use that to his advantage when up against a femme fatale. In a scene from the episode titled Shattered Image, released on January 6, 1974, we find Bixby opposite actress Leslie Parrish. The two are aboard Tony's private jet, which doubles as his home. Parrish believes she is seducing Tony to get information out of him. Tony, on the other hand, is using the seduction as misdirection to plant false information that will eventually trap the bad guys.
I've never seen anything like this.
Well, in my case, a home is not a house.
What's your connection with Willoughby? I know you built his act.
Yes, well, he's an old friend.
And the kid, Paula?
New friend.
Are you always so good to your friends?
I cherish them.
I like that. You going to help Paula's father, too?
But fortunately, he doesn't need any help. He didn't murder anybody. And also, fortunately, we have a witness. Can I trust you?
What are friends for?
Of course. Well, it's Paula.
What?
Yes. She saw the killing, and so I made an arrangement for her at 10 o'clock tonight.
And so here we have magician Anthony Blake, alone with a beautiful woman in his expensive jet home, plying her with expensive champagne and using his good looks, smoldering eyes, and sensitive voice to manipulate a femme fatale. Having solved the mystery and set a trap where later the actual police would come in and make the arrests. After all, Anthony wasn't a cop or a detective, just a clever magician. The idea of a non-violent crime solver and playboy millionaire were two of the ideas that helped sell this series to NBC. At the time, a highly sought-after demographic were women. The networks kind of had the men all wrapped up, but there was a whole new audience out there to sell goods to that the networks were aching to take advantage of. And they were cashing in on Bill Bixby's proven record with the ladies, especially cultivated in the courtship of Eddie's father, to bring in female viewers. The other selling point to the network was nonviolence. This was a time in 72, 73 that audiences were responding very negatively to the amount of violence on TV. Well, especially on Saturday morning cartoons, but also in general on their whole lineup of shows in prime time. So, to respond, networks were trying to do better by creating such hit shows as The Waltons or Little House on the Prairie. And in this project, The Magician, the network felt that they could have an adventure show, someone solving crimes, getting into trouble, but doing it in a non-violent way. So, when Anthony Blake did come up against criminals, often armed, he would defeat them using his brains, his cleverness, and sometimes magic and misdirection. In fact, the writers had a particularly problematic challenge writing the show to come up with scenarios week to week that this could believably happen. But they did, often quite successfully. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. In one episode, Anthony Blake has to rescue a woman in distress who is being restrained inside a recreational vehicle parked along a highway. Inside are two bad guys with guns. Now, I'm sure you, like me, would have no problem envisioning how a typical drama show of this era might have handled this scenario. Well, the hero would have come in by kicking in the door of the RV, using his fist to smash in the faces of the villains and rescuing the damsel in distress. But that's not how it worked on The Magician. So how does our hero Anthony Blake resolve this dilemma? Well, he scopes out the scene and pre-plans everything. The writers took advantage of the fact that he's a magician and a renowned escape artist, knowledgeable in the ways of ropes and knots and things like that. Once Blake conceives a good sound plan in his head, he, unarmed, puts his plan into action. He lures out one of the bad guys by creating a disturbance outside. When one of the bad guys comes out to investigate, he surprises him by slipping a slipknot loop over his wrist and quickly getting him on his stomach and tying his hands behind his back. And because of his knowledge of ropes and knots, this is accomplished in mere seconds. Once the first bad guy is outside helpless on the ground, shouting to alert the second bad guy who's still inside the RV, who then comes out to see what's happening to his friend. But by that time, the magician has disappeared and run behind the RV, dashed around to the front where the door is, and behind the back of the second bad guy who is trying to help his friend on the ground who's tied up, Blake slips inside the RV and drives away, thereby rescuing the the damsel in distress. There's no real fight scene, no punching, there are no gunshots. But nonetheless, the audience is entertained with an exciting rescue in an action-adventure series that was unlike anything else on TV at the time. Now, aside from using magic tricks to disorientate his opponents, Anthony Blake also used his knowledge of magic to gain entryway in all kinds of ways. If Anthony Blake was questioning someone in the middle of an investigation, as he was always doing, he might use magic to win over the person's trust, or charm the person, make them more susceptible to releasing information. Here's a great example from Episode 3, Illusion and Terror. Blake is convinced a young boy in a hospital has information that is important to his investigation. But the boy, suffering from some sort of trauma, hasn't spoken a word to anyone in weeks. With great compassion and sensitivity, Blake performs a few simple magic tricks to engage the boy in a way that begins to break down the barriers he's put around himself. In this scene you're about to hear, Blake begins his impromptu magic act with an old effect well known to magicians everywhere, the torn and restored paper trick. In this case, the torn pieces of paper are restored into a paper hat or a sombrero that Blake puts on the boy's head. But it's not enough. The boy's not talking. Not giving up, Blake transforms a handkerchief into a puppet, and through his magic puppet, Blake encourages the boy to talk to him.
Watch very carefully. Ole, sombrero, amigo. For Cowboy Luis.
Dr. Ward, 561 West.
Now, a trick I think you can do too. I just happen to have two handkerchiefs here. One for you and one for me. Now watch it very carefully. Take one end like this, and we tie a knot in it, see? Then you reach in behind and you put your finger in it, like that, see? Now, well, in this case we'll use a rubber band. We'll put it over one finger, all the way around, and over another, and then... Buenos dias, muchacho. ¿Cómo te llamas?
Luis Velasquez.
Are you my friend?
Sí, we're friends.
Bueno.
So that's a perfect example of how the writers would incorporate magic into the storyline, and I think you can hear in Bixby's voice why he was so good in this role as the magician. One thing the writers took care of early on in the beginning was to provide a motivation for Anthony Blake to just be so damn kind and helpful to everyone that he met. So a background story was established in only a couple of episodes and only in dialogue. The writers established that Blake was once imprisoned in South America on trumped-up charges. But somehow Blake escapes the prison, along the way helping another inmate in a similar situation in the process. But shortly thereafter, his fellow inmate dies, but not before leaving his vast wealth to Tony. In some versions of the story, the man that Blake meets in prison and befriends is a magician who teaches Blake over the years everything he needs to know about magic. Either way, the writers established that the long ordeal in prison and being falsely accused leaves Blake with both physical and psychological scars. For example, around his wrists, he bore the scars of where he was once shackled. At any rate, once Tony is free, he dedicates his life to helping friends in need or those who are in mortal danger, largely by his vast wealth and his skills as an illusionist magician. In other words, Blake just cannot countenance wrong being done to others, especially his friends whom he cherishes. Now, as much as I hate to say so, the magician did have its problems. Chief among them, a lackluster supporting cast that the writers kinda didn't know what to do with. Originally, the series had 3 main supporting characters. First of all, his trusty pilot. The next 2 supporting characters were father and son. First the father, Max Pomeroy, an influential newspaper columnist, and Pomeroy's wheel-bound chair son, who was an expert researcher. About midway through the first and only season, the producers made a change and got rid of Pomeroy for the most part and his wheel-bound chair son, who we never saw again. They kept Jim, the trusty pilot, and added a new character who was Blake's assistant, personal secretary, / manager, / valet. Actually, this character, his name was Dominic, brought much needed comic relief to the magician. The other big change that came around at the same time is that the producers knew that they had set the magician up with his jet and his car and this whole thing, that they really only had the money to show once, and that was for the pilot. And they didn't film all of that much of the car coming out of the jet, his white Corvette, if I haven't mentioned that before. The magician drove a beautiful white Corvette with the license plate, the Spirit. At any rate, the producer said, we can't afford to keep doing this. So a change was inexplicably put in that Anthony didn't have his plane anymore, but he did live in L.A. at a real place called the Magic Castle. That's a real thing. It still exists today. It's a club for magicians and magic enthusiasts, members only. And they decided that Anthony now lived on the top floor, and that was his home base. That was his home, and they brought in this Dominic character. And here's a clip of possibly, I think, maybe the first episode that featured the location of this real-life place in L.A. called the Magic Castle, and also the first appearance of Dominic.
Thank you very much. Now, the tradition here is that you say open sesame to the owl.
Open sesame.
See?
Now, if I tap here, you see the ball leaves here. It's all in the power
This
of the
place is
magic wand.
fantastic. What is it?
People think
Well,
that
this is the castle, and magicians and sleight-of-hand artists gather here, and civilians from all over the world come to watch.
And you live here?
Yeah, on the top floor. Yeah.
Tony, how are you?
Dominic, how are you? This is Sharon Darnell. Dominic is our host. Not only does he have the world's finest cuisine, but a wine cellar tonight.
He's always trying to marry me off to mine.
Gilbert, any messages?
That party from West Berlin called to thank you. Everyone is doing fine.
Good.
And Miss Pamela Taylor also called. Want to know if you could play a little honeymoon bridge tonight?
Tony, shall I get Sharon a table?
Yes, would you? He'll get you your own private table.
Fine. Who's Pamela?
Oh, yes. Oh, our Tony is still quite the playboy. All right. To end my presentation about the magician, we got to talk just a little bit about the magic that you saw on this TV show. As the producers famously wanted you to know at the beginning of many episodes, is that no trick photography was used in the performance of magic on The Magician.
All of the magic you're about to see is performed without photography of any kind by Bill Bixby, the magician.
So the pilot episode kind of got away with a few things along those lines, and Bill Bixby made it his priority to not have that happen again in the series and to ground the magic into a real performance. And he wanted to do the performing. And apparently, Bill Bixby thought of himself as a bit of an amateur magician. He had fooled around with it, I guess. And he wanted to do... He didn't want trick photography. He didn't want shady things happen. He wanted the magic to be real in its performance. And so they brought in a consultant by the name of Mark Wilson, who made a name for himself in L.A. early on in TV broadcasting. He became one of the first regular magicians you might see performing on television as TV developed. So Mark Wilson was the consultant. He taught Bill Bixby behind the scenes how to do things, and I imagine also was part of how, you know, they would consult him in how can we work a trick in here? How can we work this magic in here? And Mark Wilson, with his years of magic experience and knowledge, would come up with something that would fit into the storyline. So, folks, to wrap it up, well, the magician never really got the ratings that the network wanted. And then an additional problem came along as it ceased production for its first season, and that was the big deal American writers' strike of the time that really waylaid a lot of shows, and The Magician was one of them. It never really recovered, and the whole thing kind of dissolved after that. But Bill Bixby went on to have a long career in television as an actor and then later as a director, most famously for his role as David Banner in The Incredible Hulk. Sadly, in 1993, Bill Bixby lost a long battle with cancer and passed away at the premature age of 59. But he left an over 30-year legacy of his acting and directing credits that we can all remember him for, and I will never forget The Magician. So, folks, that is about it. I'm going to wrap up this article about The Magician. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I can come back again and maybe bring you some other obscure little TV show you knew nothing about. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
The Hawkstone by J. Williams was adapted for television by Roger Singleton Turner.
Many thanks to Toppie.
Yes, thank you, Toppie.
Lovely to have him back, and looking forward to seeing what he's got up his sleeve next time.
Yes, he may return with Paul, he may be on his own.
We shall see. Right, next up is the part 2 of our Crown Court article, and then after that we'll go into Martin looking at
Quatermass And The Pit.
At the 1972 Fulchester Bull Sales, a world record price was paid for Minos Merrick Mackenzie, an Aberdeen Angus bull bred by Colonel Ulrich McKeever. The buyer, Angelus de Costa, claims that the auction was rigged at his own instigation by a cattle dealer and agent, Gus Enderby, with Colonel McKeever's consent. Gus Enderby is now in the witness box.
Let me make myself quite clear, Colonel McKeever. This is the last occasion in which I will tolerate any interruption.
Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you, Andrew.
Crown Court, episode 2.
Yes.
first thing I wrote down was there's a lot of pointing going on.
There was a lot of pointing going on. It's the public gallery, isn't it?
It's the background extras. They're all gesticulating at things.
They've all got good sideburns and moustaches. Well, the men, not the lady. It's one lady, but they've all got sort of good moustaches and beards. Sideburns, not beards.
We start off with Milton Johns where we left off, don't we? He gets quite a good showing, doesn't he?
He does. He's doing his best oily Milton Johns-esque acting.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you recognise him from Enemy of the World or something, it's not a million miles away, is it?
No, he always seems to play those kind of parts.
Yeah, but I mean that's why the casting is so good in these, isn't it? You get decent parts for people.
Yes. There's not a lot of guest stars, but they get a lot to do.
Yeah. And William Mervyn's not putting up with any interruptions, is he?
No, because the shot is James Copeland as Colonel McKeever standing and pointing.
Yeah. And I wrote down a few choice phrases like pipsqueak.
Yes.
And Jimmy Riddle. You don't hear the phrase Jimmy Riddle enough these days,
you don't,
do you?
No. It's not polite to mention it.
Though William Mervyn is grinning at one point,
yes,
isn't he? The camera sort of cuts to him, and I'm assuming it's acting. It's not William Mervyn corpsing, but you never know, don't you? But I wrote down that this is in some ways Jackanory for adults, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, we've talked about Martin talked about Jackanory earlier.
Yeah.
But because of the structure of the show, you don't get to see the action.
No, we can't. It would be too expensive.
The nearest you occasionally get to it is a few black and white photos. Yeah. Although we did see, what was the one with the party?
Oh, the one with the wife swapping.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a tiny bit of filming.
Yeah.
In somebody's back garden.
Of a barbecue.
Of a barbecue with about 6 people all clustered together to make it look more.
But here it's very much story, not action. You're being told what happened.
You are.
And of course, because you're told by various sources, it never quite joins up.
No, because it's obviously from their individual point of view.
But Colonel McKeever gets in the dock, doesn't he? And you have this thing where they ask what religion you are.
Yes.
And often it's C of E.
Yeah. Or there is no religion, or I'm a Catholic or whatever.
Yeah, because if you're an atheist, you have to affirm.
You have to affirm, yeah.
But Colonel McKeever comes out with the original successionist Kirk and pacifist.
Pacifist, yeah, and then that's never picked up again.
Well, not yet. I don't know whether we'll deal with it, but it's just wonderful that is the end of part 1
cliffhanger,
advert cliffhanger, isn't it? It's a really weird place to put that, but. Yeah. But hey, then the cliffhanger at the end's quite odd as well.
Yes, it's a bit all over the place, this one, isn't it?
But I love the fact that his pet name for the bull is Dougal.
Dougal, yeah.
So you imagine a big hairy thing.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember once, years ago, we were in the middle of the country and I saw a huge bull on the horizon and I was scared it was going to get in the car.
Okay.
It was a big thing with horns.
Right.
Yeah. I quite like bulls, though. Bulls are all right. Have you ever met a bull up close?
I've never met a bull up close. I've met cows.
Yeah.
Cows are very intelligent.
Cows have acted in Sutton Park.
Cows will come to see what you're doing.
Especially when you're filming.
Yeah, because they're really nosy, cows.
But I like this thing that Ronald Rad needs the biggest yacht and the best bull and the blonde with the biggest ...
He gets cut off before he gets to finish that sentence.
Yeah. There's a lot of sentences he doesn't finish because he says that little... I didn't say it, my lord. And there's a reference to the Pudding Club as well.
Yes.
There's a nice little point here about how if you do a test on a bull or something, the results of that test are only valid on the day you did the test.
Yes.
The results might have been utterly different a day before or a day after, and that's well worth pointing out in the current climate. That testing can only give you information on the point of that test when it was made. Yeah. And the tapes, I would say, this episode 2, I don't know quite what's going on, but there's a bit where they seem to have done a slowed down shot of Ronald Rad, almost as though there was a tape fault.
Yeah.
And I think what's happened is they've got the sound for it, but there's some picture breakup.
Yeah.
So I think when making the DVD, they've just slowed the shot down so you don't get a horrible sort of picture dropout or something like that. I'm not entirely sure.
And I do wonder if that's what causes the abrupt end as well.
Possibly. Well, I don't know. I know. Because Richard Wilson's about to say something, isn't he?
And it cuts.
And it cuts off. And I wonder whether they realised in editing the episode was overrunning.
Maybe.
I don't think it's a tape fault at this point. I think it's just, oh, blimey, we need to put the cliffhanger in. Because I get the feeling the show's not allowed to overrun its slot. So it's all very locked down.
Yeah, because it's about sort of 24-minute slot, isn't it? Because obviously it's a half an hour transmission slot with a advert break in the middle.
Yeah.
So.
But what do you think of this part 2 then?
Yeah, I like it. I think I'm currently on the side of the Colonel, who's coming across much better. Okay, I think because he's got a sense of humour, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
But we'll see if it swings back again.
Yeah,
next time.
I'm a little undecided at the moment because the trouble is all this shady business in the rigging of the auction, isn't it? And like nobody's denying that it.
No.
You know.
Colonel McKeever says he doesn't know anything about it.
Yeah,
so it's definitely going on between Ronald Radd and Milton John's characters.
Yeah, but again, because you've filled in some detail about like that. Milton John's past history with the Colonel as well, you know, as he sort of got a long-term vendetta against him, and that's the whole thing about when they say about reasonable doubt.
Yes.
And the idea of reasonable doubt is such a vague phrase. A good writer like David Fisher can just fill in a few background details and just colour the characters that you do start to wonder what is going on, and that's why I think Crown Court really works. That essentially nothing happens for 3 episodes, does it?
There's no big real dramas, is there?
It's just character and dialogue and good actors
and good directors.
Yeah. And we'll say about Wojtek, the director, I think in part 3. But this one, I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether any Crown Court plots are remembered by the general public at all.
Probably not. I think Crown Court is barely remembered by the general public. It's remembered quite fondly by a certain age group of people who would have seen it when they were off school sick. Yeah, so I think a lot of Crown Court is in people's memories is associated with Lucasade.
Yeah, but my memory of it is that I'd see it listed and assume it was real. I don't think I even realised it was fiction.
Okay.
So I'd see it in the listings and go, I don't want to watch that. But having come to it so much later, I'm just slightly annoyed I missed it all the first time round.
Yes,
I'm not sure how glued to it I would have been. But now just dipping back into it again, this is so clever.
It's about time that Network released some more. Really, I think it's quite a hard series to release.
But could you see it being done now?
I could.
As a lunchtime drama, because it would be so cheap to do.
It would. I mean, I could see the BBC doing it, because ITV have very few lunchtime dramas now, but the BBC have sort of do Father Brown.
But you've got Doctors and things like that.
And, it would be after Doctors.
Yeah, and Crown Court would be a wonderful thing to bring back.
It would.
All you need is the writers. And away you go.
Yeah. And maybe you'd even have a thing where you'd show it for 3 days, and rather than having a jury, you'd have actors as a jury, and you'd have the audience at home deciding, because they're very much interactive now.
So there's a suggestion for the BBC. Have a look at doing Crown Court in a different way.
And if you do it, we want a commission.
We'll be the consultants.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So we'll return with episode 3 when Round the Archives takes another trip to the Crown Court.
The case of Da Costa against McKeever will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court.
Hans Christian Andersen's words were spoken by Frederick, and the guitar was played by Michael Jessup. Jackanory with Nina will be back at the same time tomorrow.
Quatermass And The Pit, Episode 5, The Wild Hunt. Episode 5 of the Nigel Neal six-part serial Quatermass And The Pit was broadcast on the 19th of January 1959, and the official viewing figures hit a new high of 10.6 million. People were obviously talking about it. The Wild Hunt might actually be considered to be the calm before the storm, or perhaps the very last opportunity to explain to the viewers at home the writer's reasoning behind the whole piece, just to help them catch up with where we are and what exactly is happening. Let's be honest, there won't be much time for that sort of thing during the hectic final episode, but this episode manages to visualise, through the use of the Martians, a lot of what we will have to imagine that a lot of human beings get up to in that brutal gut punch of a final episode. Remember, what you see during a rather vivid sequence here is what is implied happens on the streets of London in a week's time. But once again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. The running time for this episode is just shy of 36 minutes, and it's just as well because there's an awful lot to cram in. First, there's a recap, which, on the surviving film copies, seems to be a very different voice this week. I suppose it depended upon who was available, but the tone is also far more emphatic, leaving little doubt in the minds of the viewers at home that, at least according to the story so far, we are the descendants of a long-lost Martian civilization. Well, it saves time if that's a given from the get-go from now on. We also get to see a much shorter, re-edited silent montage showing the highlights of the terrifying events involving poor Mr. Sladen during the lengthy last section of episode 4, accompanied by a suitably spooky soundtrack, which manages to maintain the creepiness without undermining the drama, which is quite some task, and ending with that sinister vision of the pebbles on the ground rolling and undulating beneath his terrified form. And we still don't know quite what happened to him after that. In fact, the episode proper starts with Barbara Judd, played by Christine Finn, and really earning a keep in this one as she is finally given a lot to do and plenty of chances to shine, which she seizes magnificently. We meet Barbara as we return to the dig site as John Stratton's Captain Potter comes to her aid, as she stumbles up from the pit with a wound on her forehead from where something hit her during Sladen's ordeal. Strangely enough, having suffered from a supernatural assault, she is handled very much like the victim of a physical assault would be here, and her description of how she got hurt and shocked reports of what she saw and heard and Sladen running away are very evocative of exactly the way that sort of scene might have been played in a police drama at the time, although the things she says are still suggestive of more unearthly goings on. And when Michael Ripper's sergeant joins them, earning his pay for the week by talking in a serious alarmed tone of the way Sladen moved, the sinister air of strange goings-on is maintained by the actors treating the material with a rightful, solemn respect. Leaving Barbara to be cared for by the sergeant, Captain Potter goes into the now quiet hull of the Martian spaceship and examines the now dark lamps and the now still wires. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad, including our everyman figure Harold Goodwin's Corporal Gibson, walk down the ramp still bewildered by the sights they saw as Sladen fled, now claiming that they knew something was going to happen because of the sudden, deadly cold. Potter meets them talking about smashed lamps and torn cables, and suddenly very concerned because he knows all about the breaking strength of those cables and the power of the forces that could have done such a thing to them. Potter, it seems, is now more convinced about the real danger the thing in the pit now represents, and is suddenly quite keen to talk to Professor Quatermass, who, we are reminded, has been called off to that conference at the War Office that so vexed us during episode 4. He asks Barbara if she might be able to go and look for him, and offers her the use of the Land Rover to do so, and, in another nod to the fact that this is truly an ongoing narrative, Barbara first wants to retrieve her notes from Crispin's hut, which was the reason she returned to the pit before the whole Sladen incident kicked off last week. Potter, meanwhile, wants to go and find Sladen. In a cop drama, it might be to seek his revenge on the assailant who hurt his girl, but we're not in a cop drama, despite the tropes. In the eerie darkness of his office at the Institute, the camera favours the sinister face of one of those preserved Martians, before we find Cess Linder's Roney asleep at his desk. He is woken by Quatermass bursting in, furious after his meeting, and angry at the pig-headedness of the minister, born, of course, out of fear and wanting easy answers to the complicated questions that Quatermass keeps on asking. To be fair, however, from the minister's point of view, he does have someone blaming ancient biological experiments by Martians upon Pliocene ape men for what's going on, and someone suggesting that we owe our human condition to the intervention of insects. Even I struggle to think that would play well on the 6 o'clock news, and I've been following the plot. Colonel Breen's propaganda weapon theory really is the much safer bet, even if you know, like the viewers do by now, that it's a fundamentally flawed theory, despite the common sense of it. As ever, politicians remain scared of the press, their colleagues, and being blamed for something. The culture so expertly dissected 20 years later by Yes Minister is being cleverly foreshadowed here. Thankfully, we are saved from the sight of Breen looking for a tiny swastika printed on those preserved Martian remains, but our interior alarm bells start ringing when we hear that all precautions have now been cancelled at the site of the pit. Darwin is rightly name-checked here, by the way, as the two scientists drink their coffee in an episode that does feature hot beverages a lot, a shorthand for ordinary human needs in the face of adversity. In the midst of all this righteous anger between two middle-aged men coming face-to-face with idiocy, Barbara arrives, now sporting her dressing on the cut on her head, and because she's feeling a bit fainty, having dashed all over town despite her ordeal looking for the professor, Roni slips her a swift shot of that brandy he's always so ashamed of carrying, as she describes her experiences at the pit and how something hit her. This becomes a big scene for her, and she sells it brilliantly, telling us once again of how everything in the pit came alive and how Sladen didn't seem human anymore. They're interrupted by a phone call, also taken by Barbara, who really is at the centre of the action for the moment, and showing that she's not a shrinking violet. Or is it just that these two old blokes simply expect her to answer the phone despite everything she's been through? And we hear that Captain Potter has indeed found Sladen, last seen, remember, lying on the ground, surrounded by those undulating pebbles. And Barbara won't be put off because, hauntingly, she needs to see what Sladen looks like now, rather than the terrifying figure she saw earlier, and so they all dash off as once again the camera favours the figure of the Martian and mixes to a stone gargoyle in the vestry of the church, emphasising once again a point made during the researches in the archives during the previous episodes. In this vestry, gloriously lit throughout this scene by a sinister flickering firelight, the vicar, played by Noel Howlett, who telefans will know far better for his later works in sitcoms like Please Sir, is pacing anxiously until we find Sladen, deep in shock, sitting at a chair, being given a huge mug of what turns out to be cocoa, beverage spotters, provided by a woman who is a supporting artist and described in the script book as stout in a way that would be frowned upon today. Quatermass and Barbara arrive and are greeted by Captain Potter. And, whilst Barbara is initially nervous of Sladen, he has the sincere and faintly embarrassed air of someone who went far too far at a drunken party meeting his friends the morning after. Despite the chaos of his experiences earlier, all is quiet now. The professor introduces himself with a hearty, "My name's Quatermass," which the vicar counters with an icy, "And mine's Gilpin," and seems frostily defensive of his charge as he explains that he understands that Quatermass was this man's employer, at least for today. Bloody freelancers. Anyway, seemingly satisfied that Quatermass is not indeed the spawn of Satan, although if he looked at his records with regard to the fates of his employees he might have had a bigger shock, Gilpin proceeds to fill in the professor on what brought this poor unfortunate to his door that night. He seems genuinely concerned about Sladen, as well he might, given what he witnessed when they met, but reluctantly agrees to allow further questioning once it is suggested that there might be further danger in waiting. Potter and Barbara share a small bonding moment as the cast rearrange themselves. More cocoa is poured, and because it truly is an excellent performance by Richard Shaw, his calmness turns to quiet fear and then outright terror as he is pulled back into the memory of running in fear from a vision of creatures like the ones they found in the hull, becoming one of the creatures himself, and a description of ancient Mars jumping and leaping and the huge places reaching up into a sky of dark, dark purple. Then the strange, sinister radiophonic noise that we have started to associate with the more terrifying moment starts up again, and a fire poker, suddenly possessed in much the same way as the objects at the building site, falls crashing to the ground, breaking the spell and allowing the noise to fade to nothing again. The same thing all over again, only on a far reduced scale. The room seems suddenly colder, as does the vicar's mood as he starts to preach, and is interrupted by Quatermass suggesting that whatever the vicar thinks has possessed Sladen might very well have always been lying dormant within him and all of us. This gives the vicar something to latch on to, and as he starts to babble about the difference between faith and science and fashionable explanations for the inexplicable, he seems genuinely surprised to find Quatermass agreeing with him about the nature of evil, albeit an ancient evil that has been lying buried in a pit, mostly undisturbed, for 5 million years. for life on ancient Mars is precisely what he believes Sladen experienced and described to them, and whilst he really wants to investigate this further, he suggests an experimental reconstruction of what happened that night should be attempted back at the pit. The vicar, however, puts his foot down at Sladen being put in further peril. It's a powerful trigger word for viewers at home, that peril, and refuses to let Sladen be put through any more of this, at least not that night. Sladen, however, is a rather lovable and helpful old soul with good insurance, remember, and because he is an ordinary bloke with a certain amount of bravery, agrees to try as long as the vicar comes along to look after him. And so the plot is about to move on, and our heroes are about to leave. However, from beyond a doorway into the main church, a noise is heard, and we are momentarily on edge again, only to find, false jeopardy alert, that it's only that callous, self-serving journalist/reporter, James Fullerlove, lurking in the shadows again and heartlessly taking a moment to take a snapshot of the unfortunate Sladen in the pursuit of his latest scoop. We cut to the War Office, where Colonel Breen, remember him, is dictating his press release into a recording machine the size of a small refrigerator, and whilst the minister and his private secretary are congratulating themselves at successfully announcing that the missile was indeed an evil Nazi hoax and having it believed by their pals in the press, again, little changes does it, Captain Potter bursts into, well, burst their bubble. This brief scene serves to cover the move as Quatermass, Roney, and, making himself surprisingly comfortable in Roney's office, James Fullerlove, explain that Potter is unlikely to have any chance in getting the War Office to retract their statement, which rather cleverly serves to explain the scene we have just witnessed without it needing to be any longer than it was. Then we are introduced to the device as we see Roney and Barbara tinkering with the purely experimental optic encephalograph plot device that will drive much of the story for the rest of this episode and serve to demonstrate a hideous massacre involving space aliens without the need to actually film a hideous massacre involving human beings next week, because we see it on ancient Mars, so we can imagine the streets running with those rivers of blood. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, aren't I? Anyway, this device gets a quick test, a lot of explanation about how it's supposed to work, whilst reporter, same difference, James Fullerlove discusses the fact that the missile, or whatever, in the pit is far from inert and seems capable of turning vibrations or electricity or energy from any source into something that affects people. This is important stuff, people, so take note. Much of what is to happen later on is explained right there if you're paying attention. Brian Worth, incidentally, is far better in this episode than he was back in that scene in episode 3, Imps and Demons, that so vexed me, so I guess it must have been an aberration fueled by adrenaline that week. Anyway, he's been a reporter, for 12 years. The script book says 14. Come Michaelmas. It may seem an odd turn of phrase from Neil there, perhaps, at least to modern ears, but it serves to add an unusual bit of character to the ace reporter and refers to September the 29th, fact fans, and used to mark another quarter turned in the financial year. So it does make sense for someone to mark their career by it. Anyway, it prompts a bit of a natter about press coverage of paranormal activity, poltergeists and telekinesis, as well as a bit of business with a mug of tea beverage spotters. And as the old professor looks once again at that old preserved Martian cadaver, throws in a few notions about second sight and the ability to put images into another person's mind, just in case the viewers might think the stuff that follows is actually starting to get a little bit too far-fetched. And, of course, their discussion about the nature of the hull itself, Barbara's admission that she felt things, and how there are vestiges of ancient life on Mars that we all carry within ourselves, is basically the entire plot of the story, explained in full to a secondary character in an almost throwaway little scene in episode 5 of a 6-part serial, as the interesting stuff seems to be going on across the room. Exquisitely done. Interestingly, it is James Fullerlove who gets to utter the immortal line, "So, as far as anybody is, we're the Martians now." And almost nobody bats an eye. Instead, the fiendishly science fiction-y bit of kit is plonked upon the reporter's head, and they run a proper sci-fi moment of a test to see whether they can see the lamp that he can see. And Roney's genius is displayed for all to see as they decide to tinker with the device a little bit more. And so the next day dawns back in the pit, and the Reverend Gilpin is inside the spaceship looking at the markings of ancient evil and looking at the very spot where Sladen's unfortunate journey began. Outside the ship, Quatermass is in the full optic encephalograph kit, and with that and the pit location itself, we do wonder whether this is a film insert or that fade out was originally far longer than it now is. Anyway, Gilpin is carrying a briefcase. You don't see those very often these days, do you? And explains to Fullerlove that he thought he might have to try a bit of exorcism with the old bell, book and candle. Fullalove is, however, rather dismissive, saying that they'd already tried that back in 1341, which is a tad snarky of him, but it shows that Neil is up to his old tricks of inserting sinister symbolism that the audience would be very familiar with into this tale, just to remind them that disturbing things are still afoot despite all of that rationality they've been seeing. The machine is tested, and the observers can all see the hut that Quatermass is seeing, and bravely Sladen is there to tell Quatermass precisely what it was that he did the night before. Barbara is also there, bravely helping to set up the recording equipment in the place where she was brutally attacked only the night before. They really don't appreciate how much Barbara does for them, these boffins, do they? Quatermass enters the spaceship. The power is cut, and it begins. The twisting wires, the unearthly sounds. Sladen is immediately entranced again and has to be calmed by the vicar. Nothing is being transmitted through Quatermass, but we notice that Barbara is also stumbling blindly towards the ship with that strange possessed walk that the Enchanted have, and she announces that she can see the Martian vision, and as they struggle to get the device onto her instead, the vicar has to fight to restrain Sladen, who is starting to panic, and Fullalove sees the images from Barbara's mind start to appear on the screen as all hell is breaking loose around them once again, ending with a shrill scream as they finally wrench the device from her head and normality is restored. The vicar is furious at what they've put these people through, but it is Sladen who announces that it seemed different this time and pointedly mentions all that killing. And then, whilst Potter gets another moment to act all protective of Barbara, Breen arrives unexpectedly, having heard that there was some kind of insane Quatermass experiment going on. Well, they always end well, don't they? Roney, meanwhile, is extracting the film of his recording, and it seems that they might have something to show Breen and his War Office buddies. Like I say, because that was an effects and people-heavy scene, I think it was pre-filmed, because everybody is in place at the War Office for a film show very quickly after the fade. Quatermass stands at the front giving a lecture about what they are about to see, a recording of an ancient memory, and he admits for those of us watching at home that the equipment it was recorded on is far less subtle than the device in the pit is at storing and projecting images. Whether this is merely an understandably nervous scriptwriter preparing his audience for a scene that might not have been executed all that well, given the limits of special effects technology at the time, is unclear, but once bitten and all that. Although, actually, when we do see the sequence, you really shouldn't have worried, because it's actually superbly executed, even if modern audiences brought up in our CGI-laden cinematic world might find it less than astounding these days. Roney describes what we are about to see as the Wild Hunt, the phantom ride of witches and devils of fable, a ritual cleansing of the ancient hives, a race purge, and basically a horrifying demonstration of the ultimate form of a desire for racial purity. Gloves off, Nigel. Tell it like it is. What we do see is less than a minute of those Martian creatures we were introduced to at the end of episode 3, only in far greater numbers and basically alive and hopping about like grasshoppers on the dark surface of ancient Mars. Granted, some of the hoppity stuff at the beginning is a little unconvincing, but when the savage brutality of the ethnic cleansing begins and we see close-ups of animated eyes, creatures crawling for their lives, and brutal evisceration of and hacking at the living and dying bodies of Martians, all in a kind of whirlwind of frenzied cutting and blurred swoops past the lens, and perhaps surprisingly, given that this is all achieved with puppets and models in the 1950s on a budget that I can't imagine stretched very far at all, it all works astonishingly well. It's the image of those animated eyes that sticks with you, I find, especially when you remember how dead we were told they were when first spotted through that scope at the end of episode 3. The shot is used twice in extreme close-up and remains genuinely disturbing. Well, it disturbs me anyway. The minister and his cronies are far less impressed, to be honest, and glibly explain it away as the wild imaginings of an impressionable, overwrought young woman. Nothing ever changes, does it? The gits. I hope people end up bunging rocks at the lot of them. Oh, wait a minute. Let's go back a moment. The minister finds it all most curious, whilst Professor Quatermass does his level best to convince them that this was a memory of ritual slaughter and equates it all to the activities of termites and wasps in their hives. Be careful, Nigel, your influences are showing. Although making real-life comparison is a very good move at a point like this, just in case people are sitting at home mocking the ridiculousness of the whole idea. In fact, it's such an effective move that writers of SF horror have been using the same device ever since, and maybe even earlier. The point that the sequence really serves, however, is the unsettling foretelling of what people are likely to do to each other if the dark powers still held in the pit are unleashed. And let's be honest, the original audience have got a full week ahead of them to dwell on that spicy nugget of thought. Breen and Quatermass are about to lock horns again over the events that occurred in the pit, because Breen is still clinging on to that vibration effects theory that caused him to throw up in episode 3, and is merciless about the suggestion that the missile has the power to redirect human energy into forces beyond our control. Should have listened to Captain Potter. Those cables didn't tear themselves apart. Meanwhile, the minister, having made his mind up about the whole thing and not being prepared to change it, they're still around, these types, you know. He's looking for what he believes is a reasonable explanation, a bit of spin, if you like, which he believes is hallucination, or at least a mental image, and that Professor Quatermass is wrong. He isn't, of course, but what can you do with these people? Anyway, with a reminder that they are all in the service of the public, the die is cast, the excavation is going to be opened up to the public, and the inevitable tragedy is suddenly unavoidable as our hero bristles with fury. And so we approach the end of the episode. A taxi pulls up alongside a BBC outside broadcast van circa 1959, and big old BBC cameras are being shifted into position for the kind of live broadcast you really can't imagine getting the public interested in at all nowadays. Still, there were only 2 channels back then, so what else could they be watching? There are, of course, whole articles yet to be written on the fake programmes within programmes that feature in TV drama series that scriptwriters expected that the public might actually watch. But that is, perhaps, for another time. Here we find ourselves in a busy pit, with police officers and crowds of journalists, reporters, and telefolk all milling around alongside our main characters. One of them is Edward Burnham, who would make more of an impression in a couple of Doctor Who's later on, not least as Professor Kettlewell in Robots. Another is the long-time Dalek-in-Chief John Scott Martin, playing a TV cameraman hoping for something interesting to shoot. Careful what you wish for, Johnny boy. Anyway, lots of lovely high-tension cables are lying around all over the place, and there's much talk of firing up the generator, and, as the wise, attentive viewers at home already know, that's not a good idea in this particular pit. Nevertheless, all is proceeding as planned, press releases are being handed out, and Breen is reading out his prepared statement and batting away irritating questions from journalist, reporter, James Fullerlove, and a woman journalist, reporter, with a fixation with Nazis, who sounds not unlike that hang 'em and flog 'em woman on the jury in Hancock's Half Hour. Breen, of course, does his usual bullying act by trying to belittle Fullerlove in front of the other members of the press pack, but then Quatermass steps forward to slam the final nail in any working relationship he might have possibly had with Breen by asking him whether he's an imbecile or a coward, and suggesting that he's so afraid of something that he prefers to make the thinnest of rationalizations. This, of course, gets Breen bristling as well, although he does give the impression of a man finally cracking under the strain, but they are interrupted by a flash of electricity, and their lights go out as the electrician working inside the spaceship is horribly killed in front of his mate. And, as the horribly burnt body is hastily removed from the darkened pit, and the surviving electrician is helped away by Quatermass and one of the officials, the camera creeps inside the hull, and we notice that its surface is starting to pulse and glow and throb in a creepy, almost organic manner, and the soundtrack appears to have developed a noise not unlike a heartbeat. The Martian ship seems to be coming alive, and episode 5 is all but over as the credits roll over that eerie alien pulsation and fade to black, with the credits rolling until... The caption at the end tells it all. The next episode will be broadcast on the 26th of January at 8 p.m. It's called Hob.
It's one of the familiar names for the devil, you know.
And as episodes go, I promise you that it's utterly fantastic.
John Stride is a national theatre player, and today's story was adapted for television by Paul Ciani.
Thank you once again to Martin.
Yes, thank you, Martin.
Yes. And part 6 will be along fairly soon.
It will. Yes.
Right, we're reaching the end of episode 49. A couple of things still to come.
Yes.
But we've got that big old episode 50 coming soon, haven't we?
What are we going to do for that?
What are we going to do for that? I have absolutely no idea.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah, we had some ideas and plans, but with the current situation, it's a little tricky to call.
Yes.
I've got lots of things to choose from. That's all I'm going to say.
That's good.
So yeah, Crown Court coming up next, and then Paul and Nick will look at
Tales of the Unexpected.
Welcome back to the Crown Court. Hello, Lisa.
Hello, Andrew.
First thing I wrote down for episode 3, I put wigs with tails.
Yes, because the first shot is from behind.
Yeah.
There's a lot of interesting shots in this episode, actually.
Yeah.
Cameras all over the place.
Yeah, you get to see Richard Wilson from behind,
You
don't you?
do.
Which you don't often get to see.
No.
So we start off with some Quatermass links.
We do.
As Duncan Lamont, as the vet,
Yes.
takes the stand.
Yes.
So he's in Quatermass Experiment.
Yes.
And also in the film version of Quatermass and the Pit.
Okay.
So proving that everything links.
It does.
It's weird the way all these things link
is.
up. And I just put camera shots galore.
Yes, you're getting it over people's shoulders, and it's really quite daring in a way, because the cameras then would have been quite heavy. So to get them in some of the positions must have been quite difficult.
Well, I noted later on, this is a great example of sort of multi-camera VT in a nutshell, isn't it?
Yeah.
And they're ringing, Wojtek is ringing every possible camera angle from the set, and ones you wouldn't even think of. No, we said we'd say about Wojtek.
We did. Yes.
Many years ago, Sam Kelly was nice enough to reply to some of our tweets, because we found a picture of Sam Kelly in the story To Catch a Thief from 1973.
Yes.
We sent him a picture and he said, "Good grief, the sideburns."
Yes, they're good sideburns.
Yeah. This exchange is still searchable on Twitter. So we said to him, "Do you remember anything about the director, who's only credited as Wojtek? We were intrigued by the name." And Sam Kelly replied and said, "Polish, I think, and a very nice man. Got a feeling he might have been a designer too," which he was.
Designer.
Yeah, but he was.
He was a television designer as
he
well.
was designer and became a director, and then went back to design as well.
Yes.
And I said, "Thanks. We've been watching quite a few Crown Court episodes recently, and we always cheer when Wojtek's name comes up at the end." And Sam Kelly replied, "Are these box sets, or are they on a channel? I'd like to see old pals." And I said, "Collections of episodes available from network DVD." So yet another actor who didn't know their stuff was out there.
No. I don't know if he ever got round to getting it.
I don't know whether he did. I don't remember hearing, but hey. But yeah, there's also a bit where the microphone's not over Richard Wilson at one point, because he starts speaking and you can't hear what he's saying until the microphone zooms over.
So the boom has to zoom over there, doesn't it? These days they'd be mic'd with radio mics, wouldn't they?
But it's just on a long pole at the moment. If you,
it didn't pop in at all during this episode.
No, you don't see it. There are a couple of episodes where you do catch bits of camera and things like that sneaking behind the set. You've also got Hal Galili as the transportation manager, and I was going, I recognise him from somewhere, but I couldn't put my finger on it till I realised. Well, I've seen him in a few things, but he's the American general in the Tomorrow People War of the Empires.
Okay, is that the one with the thing with the googly eyes?
I'm doing hand motions.
Yes.
The sauce-ons.
Is it Roy Skelton or something?
Yeah. You should. I should show you War of the Empires one day.
That's quite a late one, isn't it?
That's the last one. Yeah. That's the last proper Tomorrow People story. Yeah.
Okay, let's not get into that.
Let's not get into that argument. But yeah, he's sort of brought on as a witness, but there's meant to be some bad blood between him and Ronald Rad, isn't there?
And it's quite unfair to his character, because Mr. Dealey...
He sort of smears him a bit, doesn't he?
Yeah, and obviously he can't answer that accusation, because it's not to do with that.
He's been accused of stealing engine parts worth $4,000 or something. But I love the way he's currently staying at a hotel in Fulchester.
Yes.
Which is being paid for by
Colonel
McKeever.
Yes. Well,
yeah.
He's his witness, obviously. That would happen.
But this episode is structured very nicely, and you get the last few bits of evidence in part 1, then you get the adjournment and the all-stand bit as we go into part 2, and we get the summing up, don't we?
We do. And unusually, I would have thought he would have gone for the judge would have gone for Mr. Dealey first, because they're bringing the case, but he doesn't. He goes for Richard Wilson, Jeremy Parsons first, who's the defendants.
Yeah, I mean, I noted that Richard Wilson says it's an unusual case, but to which I put, aren't they all?
Yes.
Because
there are no normal cases in
it's just imaginative writing all the way, isn't it, with Crown Court?
Yes.
And some of the bonkers plots that we've seen.
Some of them are crazy, yes.
But it's a nice sort of summing up, which says money or vanity, which is the most important, and the driving force behind these cases. Who needed the money? Well, technically the Colonel needed the money, because you found out all this stuff that he's been sort of in debt and things.
That he lost some money on the stock market. Well, he
got divorced.
Well, we lost money in a company that went into liquidation.
Yeah. A property company. Wasn't it?
And then he lost money on the stock market, and then he got divorced. But as he points out, the money you got from the sale of the bull is nowhere near what would cover the price of his herd and the price of his farm and the land. So you have to balance out whether the money you got would compensate for the money he might lose by being branded a not very good breeder of cattle.
But civil cases are always harder to call than criminal cases, aren't they?
Yeah.
With a criminal case, you just have to work out whether they've broken a specific law or not, which is what they're charged with.
I don't know, because there's one occasion, and I think it's not because the pilot episode's to do with medical neglect, but I think it's either the first proper episode of Crown Court or one very early on, where somebody's accused of assaulting a policeman who's played by Ian Marter.
Yeah.
And it's patently obvious that this character did it, yet the jury find her innocent.
Yeah.
I was furious at that.
But I like what the judge says. There are no legal niceties to confuse you. And I just put Mr. Rose is shining through with that line, because it really is Mr. Rose.
He is Mr. Rose
there.
by any other name. Yeah.
So if you like Mr. Rose stuff,
you'll love William Mervyn Crown Court.
It really is, and you could almost imagine that it's almost the same character, couldn't you? Because it's so close.
Yeah, because we always enjoy it more, I think, when it's William Mervyn as the judge.
He's one of the best ones.
He is because you also get John Barron.
Yeah,
he's always grumpy.
Yeah,
he always looks like he's not comfortable sitting there. And Andre Van Kissingen.
Yeah,
who he's okay, but he's not as much fun.
Yeah.
And then later on you get sort of Frank Middlemas and Richard Warner and all sorts of different people. So.
But yeah, basically, whom do you believe? And that's the thing. So we get the verdict, and I won't spoil how it worked.
No.
But I just wrote hubbub at the end.
Yes, there's a lot of which I think is
it almost feels like ad-libbing, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, because the Colonel sort of gets a flask out and all sorts of stuff goes on. There's a load of actors' business, isn't there?
The other ones are all going off.
Yeah, and I just wonder whether they'd sort of vaguely sketched in what they were going to do.
For both verdicts.
Because
obviously they don't know what the verdict's going to be.
They have to plan something for both endings.
Yeah.
But how much is left to the actors? And it did feel very loose.
It did.
And I liked that. Yeah. There were so many actors just doing stuff on screen, and you almost have to slow it down to see what the hell's going on. Yeah. So I really liked that sort of. It's not a mess. It's just sort of very realistic,
isn't it?
It's
natural. It's what would happen at the end of a case when everybody's commiserating or
congratulating. And are they just trying to get as much in shot as possible at the end? Just sort of move the camera about a bit, you know. But I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's great fun. Crown Court, particularly those episodes, because as I said in the first part of this, it's not too heavy.
No.
Because there are some of them we still haven't watched, because you read the description and go, oh, that's going to be
But sometimes they're not as bad as you think they're going to be, actually. We've read some description, I'm not sure about this.
I think the only one we probably won't ever watch again is the infanticide or murder one.
Yeah.
Which is very depressing.
Oh,
that very dark.
That is dark for lunchtime, isn't it?
Yes, very dark. So, that won't be doing
that. Well, it's dark for 9 o'clock, some of it, so
These days, you would not get away with doing that in the daytime.
Yeah.
No, because it's very...
But it is a remarkable series.
It is.
And although some of the discs are now proving actually hard to find, it's a great shame.
Some of them have gone out of print.
Yeah, but there are still some discs available. Yeah. And I think it's very much the case that if you enjoy actors of this period, you're going to find some stories with some of your favourite actors in these. And that's what you go for. Yeah. And you just get to see them. And I think they have fun recording them.
I think they do. They look like they're having fun.
That does come across. That it's just a few days' work, maybe. But
they probably didn't pay much.
Yeah, but you've got some good parts for good people
to get their teeth into.
Yeah. So there we are. There's the Crown Court, and we would say, treat yourself to a few.
Yes. Track them down. Well, you don't have to track them down. They're available quite freely, but have a look, buy one set and see if you like it, and if you do, get some more, because they are very addictive.
Yes, indeed. Okay, right, we'll say thank you, and see you later. Bye.
Join us again next week when our cameras will be back to see another case in the Crown Court.
Rosalind Knight will be back again tomorrow to tell you another story of The 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit.
Circumstances, I trust you will forgive me if I insist that you comply with the terms laid down in my letter of the 23rd inst. What the hell's the meaning of this? Can I ask you the same question? I happen to be in the middle of dictating a letter. I don't care what you're doing. Is this the sort of letter you send to a friend?
Hello again, Round the Archives listeners. It's me, Paul Chandler, Paul the Shy Yeti from the Shylock podcast. Whichever, well, call me what you like. No, nothing rude. Anyway, I'm back with my colleague Nick Goodman, colleague and friend. We're going to talk to you about a series that is beloved by both of us. Yes. We've covered it before, but I'm sure Nick will tell you a bit more about that. We're going to be talking about Tales of the Unexpected, but we haven't necessarily gone for the really, really famous first season ones, the Roald Dahl ones from that period. But we've both chosen an episode. And Nick, what have you? What do you? I know you wanted to speak sort of generally as well as specifically.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about Tales?
Tales was very big in my life at the beginning of the 80s, and well, first of all, it appeared in March '79 as a sort of Saturday night show. And it was very heavily publicised because, of course, with Roald Dahl connection and everything. And I remember catching, during season one, I saw only one episode all the way through, and that was Way Up to Heaven. They were all Roald Dahl in that first season. And I just remember seeing enough of it the title sequence absolutely captivated me. I was always, you know, it was one of those things I kept coming back to the title sequence if nothing else. And I remember pondering over why it was on so late at night. And I remember saying to my mum, you know, sort of, why are they putting it on sort of 9 o'clock plus, you know, and which when you're 10 years old is quite late. And I remember I said, do you think it's quite scary? And they said, Mum said, well, it's probably a little bit disturbing at that time of night. And I thought, ooh, because as I mentioned before, I was probably my own their White House. You know, I was. My parents were not censorship at all. I don't remember a single program I was banned from watching because it was too frightening. But anyway, I'm. You know, it was one of those things you do as a kid where you creep a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and you see a little. And I thought, right, Way Up to Heaven. That's the last episode of the season. I'll sit down and watch it. And when it came back in 1980 for season 2, I was right. I'm really going to go for it this time. And I was absolutely delighted and ever fascinated with the title sequence. Frustrated I couldn't track down a single of the theme tune, because I absolutely love Ron Granger's theme tune. It was one of the last ones he did before he died, and it's a classic, same as Doctor Who. It's an all-time classic. And I watched all of series 2, and I think, even though I've watched all of the DVDs now, there are ones in the American ones I swear I haven't seen. But I, as far as I remember, I didn't watch this episode. And certainly series 2 cemented my interest in the show. And it for a long time it rode alongside or just one step behind Doctor Who as my favourite programme.
I remember when it came out on DVD, the sets were sort of released as seasons, and I think I bought a few of them for your birthday and things. Yes. At
the time, I was delighted. It wasn't actually some of the best episodes, but at the time, I was really excited that it had come out. Since then, there's been some very excellent releases on network, which have been out for some time, and with a strong slant on the fact that they're Roald Dahl. In actual fact, the other thing I really liked about the program, apart from the fact they were neat, really well made half-hour thrillers, and you could do that now. I just feel that thrillers go on too long, really. So you could really neat little short stories. And I really liked when it was Roald Dahl. He did introduce a few stories that weren't his own, but eventually they, for want of a better word, phased him out. Yeah. But I always liked it when Roald Dahl introduced him, because he was a complex character, and that came through in his books. And he was actually a bit more scary than some of the stories. He sat with this roaring fire, twiddling his pencil. He goes, I think you'll find this story rather disturbing, because I thought I wrote it when I saw someone being strangled to death by a manta. He'd come up with beautifully told, beautifully eerie kind of introduction. Much better than when I look at the Hitchcock's The Birds. And go away, fat old fool. We want to watch the film. And but Roald Dahl's introduction really boosted it. I wish he could have introduced every single episode, because he was so good. I just love the show. I just love it. And even I'd even watch a NAF one. But I've got some of my favourites. But yeah.
So this time, when we knew we were going to record this, I said to you, you pick one and I pick one. And yes. Let's talk about yours first. You've picked one from season 5. It was shown on the 30th of May, 1982.
Well, it's called The Moles. I actually saw it, like most of the rest of the series, I saw it when it first went out.
I shall never forget what you've done for me, Mr. Boyle, both in prison and out of it. Talking to you has made me a new man. No. Crime does not pay, not in the long run.
It's exactly what I told you.
And how right you was, Mr. Boyle. And how sad that it took me so long to realise how right you was. I mean, I can't even blame my upbringing. My father was an honest man, my mother was an honest woman. And I broke their hearts.
Well, there you are. It's never too late to mend. Cheers.
Oh, cheers.
What are you doing now?
Social science. at the Open University.
Oh, so you're going to be a social worker?
I was particularly interested because obviously your average, I mean, I'm overgeneralizing. I wouldn't love the show if it was this predictable all the time, but you had husband wanted to do away with wife, has a pretty mistress and everything, and and it something goes horribly wrong, and there's music and we all laugh at the end. But with this one, it was comical. It was comedy. It was like an Ealing sort of caper. I'm not a great. Ali's more into Ealing capers films than me, but the sheer quality of the cast. I mean, I remember there was a picture in the TV Times with all the kind of like posed of Harry H. Corbett is the main guest star in it, and it's about he's this chap who's in trouble with the bank, and the banker's a very old friend of his. Fulton Mackay plays the banker, and the guy who's in trouble is Harry H. Corbett. They're both actors I admire very much, and there's Billo in a part, just slap bang in the middle of his Last of the Summer Wine success. Joe Gladwin, who was in Last of the Summer Wine at the time, and they're all playing the most marvellous comedy parts to the hilt, and just for a change, nobody's wife is decapitated, or nobody kind of finds herself in an awkward situation. It's just a nice natured, a daft caper where they're all trying to tunnel into the bank, the Fulton Mackay's bank. And they're all so unprepared to be bank robbers. The Fulton Mackay's discovered a heart condition. And it just uses the talents of the cast so well. And most significantly, though, this shows the era it was made because people cared about the actors. There was an announcement at the end of the first broadcast to say that this was Harry H. Corbett's final job before he died, because he died 2 months before. So he recorded this just before he went. And I do remember there was a lot of that at the time. Tavern Thomas, the same year, died, and they showed a still of him after the episode of Heidi High he did, saying this is the last thing recorded before he died. And I just, it's got a special place in my heart. Because I'm an admirer of Steptoe rather than a fan, but Harry H. Corbett, I think, was quality. And this shows his comedy talents very well. Fulton Mackay, who's usually so terribly serious and everything, works so well with him.
Yeah, you had shown it me before, but the bit that I remember which made me chuckle was because Bill Owen's playing like a reformed criminal, and they think, oh, he'd be good to come and help this. But when they speak to him, he's kind of like, oh, I'm doing this Open University degree or course, and I'm doing this, and I'm going to church. And
yes,
then
right.
Expressions
you
are
see
like,
before you,
but it doesn't
Christian
take
man.
Yeah, it doesn't take long for him to be. When they mention the money, he's like, how much?
and that shows their comedy talent very well, because Harry H. Corbett in almost in Steptoe mode goes, how would you like to earn 20 grand? What? It's just a lovely moment, and it's full of lovely moments, and for once you can relax and enjoy a caper, and it's just it doesn't take itself too seriously. I'm not sure it's actually my favourite episode, but it's among my favourites. It's because it's so different, and there are so many talented people in it. Director was Peter Hammond, who I mistakenly thought was PJ Hammond of Saffron Steel and Ace of Wands fame for a while, but isn't it? But he directed there's a Fulton Mackay link there, because he directed the first episode of King of the Castle, which featured Fulton Mackay, and seems to know how to get the best out of him. But no, lovely episode in the middle of a quite a serious season. But you had the episode. The other one that I really like from that season is Stranger in Town with Derek Jacobi, almost playing a sort of Colin Bakerish doctor's kind of extravagant character, and that turns incredibly sinister at the end. But a strong season, I think, a strong season.
How'd you like to earn 30 grand?
Did you say 30 grand? Could be 100 grand. Could be 200 grand. Doing what? Robbing a bank. Doing what? Robbing a bank. What do you two know about robbing banks?
Nothing.
But we're willing to learn.
No, I tend to like the sinister ones, and the landlady is one of my favourites. And
wonderfully eerie.
Yeah, that one's set in Bath, and when I went there recently, we were saying, look out for the landlady, but that's not the one I'm going to be talking about.
Yeah, going back to landlady, I must admit, don't get me wrong, I think my preference would always be for the sinister one because it's a sinister show. Yeah. But I just thought it pops up as a nice one to the other comical one. Sorry, I'm just going off on the other comical one I adore is the Christmas Party. I think it's called that, with Robert Morley in it. And he's playing this wonderfully cynical character and again gets some really cracking lines. So, but I used to say, Tales always worked best when it's sinister, and certainly the landlady is one I rate highly as well.
So the one that I've picked, I've sort of taken a different approach in that I was kind of thinking, well, what one should I go for? And as I was going through Wikipedia, I noted that although Roald Dahl stories were sort of phased out or they were used up, I don't think they never did all of them because he did write quite a few books, but his influence on the show definitely sort of faded away. But I was interested to note that there was one in season 9 called The Surgeon, which I don't think I've read. And I also tend to be quite interested in shows towards the end of their time, or looking for the good in. People tend to write shows off, and quite often there were really good episodes in the later seasons of shows. So The Surgeon was episode 3 of season 9. It was shown on the 15th of January 1988. There'd been a bit of a gap because season 8 was really short, like 4 episodes or something. And,
yes. Yes, because I think, was that the season 8? That's the 88 one. That's the last one, isn't it?
Well, no, season 9 is the last.
Season 9. Oh, right. Yeah, because there was a lot of. I think it was it the penultimate one where it was basically nearly all American. There was very, very, very few British, and I've always wondered, going off at a tangent here, I've always wondered whether there was a co-op, there was a swap, kind of like, the Americans will do something, I'll do that, or whether they were imported under the tail of Tales of the Unexpected as something completely different. I've never read anything confirming or denying why there was American episodes and why there were British episodes, and whether those American episodes were actually bona fide Tales of the Unexpected or just incorporated in. I'd love to know one day, because it's an interesting setup.
Unlike the Moles, The Surgeon has quite a big cast, and the main star is John Alderton. And weirdly, I noted that the episode before, the Colonel's Lady, stars Pauline Collins. So they must have been they must have
job lot.
Yeah, like, well, how are you both?
One get one free.
But, and actually,
Alderton was already. Had he done 2 by then? He did the Vicar one, not Genesis. There's another Roald Dahl Tales of the Unexpected he was in where Georgie Porgy. That's right. Mm-hmm. He was in Georgie Porgy with Joan Collins in. I think he did 2 or 3 tales.
Yeah. I must watch Colonel's Lady because it not only does it have Pauline Collins, but it has Gareth Thomas and Joss Ackland. So,
and a wonderful Joss Ackland.
But The Surgeon is about a surgeon who is, it's set in Cambridge, so it's got some good location shots. But John Alderton plays a surgeon who's given a diamond by a rich client who he saves the life of.
D in the trade means the very best quality white. In some places, it's called a river, mainly in Scandinavia. Now, a layman would call this a blue white. It doesn't look very blue to me. Oh, but it is. The purest white always contains a trace of blue. Now, think of the blue bags back in the old days in your mother's washing boiler. They made the clothes whiter. Yes, of course. This is a loop. A
a jeweler's magnifier, a 10 times loop. And with this, any imperfections will be revealed. Not modern, though. Definitely not modern. There are too many facets. But I should say that this stone has been in your friend's family for several generations. It's superb.
Approximately how many facets would there be on it?
58.
You know exactly?
Oh, yes.
And what do you imagine it might be worth?
Oh, I never imagine in this business, Mr. Sandy.
No, of course not. But in round terms.
Oh, well, in round terms, stone this size, D colour. Oh, in the trade, say, £20,000 a carat. In the shops, double that, £40,000. Shall we see what she weighs in at?
When he gets it valued, it is extremely valuable, and in short notice, he and his wife wonder where they should stash it, and they put it in an ice container of ice in the freezer. But one of his younger colleagues has witnessed some of this, and he and a girlfriend break into their house when they're out, and they don't think they find the diamond, but they start drinking John Alderton's booze, and the girl ends up swallowing the diamond, and eventually it comes back to them because she has to have an operation, and so it turns up at the surgery again.
Yeah.
And, you can kind of see that it would be a sort of, it does. I get a feeling it almost would probably. I would like to read the original. I wonder if it almost worked better as a story, because it is very contrived. All the twists. Like so the colleague hears and breaks in, and just someone just happens to drink it. I mean, I think you noticed a diamond in her life. It was a big diamond. I mean, you don't.
I also I think with the Roald Dahl Tales of the Unexpected, when you read the original, they haven't got the twist. In some cases they haven't actually got the twisty end. They've got the sinister premise, but they haven't. The end's been sharpened a bit. It's like one of them. I won't say which one, just in case people want to watch it. But there's one where someone's poisoned at the end. And in the book, he said, "Oh well, actually, come to think of it, I'm not feeling too well myself." And you couldn't do that on TV. On the telly version, you see him fall over. You see his butler eat something and fall over. And it's all it's blurry and kind of. So in actual fact, I think that it'd be, as you say, it'd be interesting to see read the original of The Surgeon, because they probably twisted it a bit to get, as it were.
Because they have to do a silly little twist at the end when it's all resolved and they've got the diamond back, and they're in bed, they're having a drink and celebrating, and the wife says, "So where did you put the diamond this time?" And he said, "Well, needless to say, just keep an eye on your ice." And she kind of makes a choking noise, and they laugh, and it's I'm sure that wasn't in the book. I'm sure that was. Yeah. That does seem quite true, but it was quite a good cast, and it was quite fun, but it was very controlled.
Oh, Robert, it is beautiful.
It is, isn't it?
Oh, it's lovely.
What do you think it's worth?
Oh, a lot. It's bound to be. Look at it.
Well, come on. Take a guess. How much?
Oh, I really have no idea. Well, quite a few hundred.
Try it.
You mean it's more?
It's quite a bit more.
Quite a few thousand.
Would you be pleased if it were worth quite a few thousand?
Well, look, of course I would. Is it really worth quite a few thousand?
Another sip of sherry.
Robert, tell me.
It is worth, very probably, £500,000.
You're joking.
John Alderton's always good value for money.
Yes, yeah. He and Pauline were born a couple of months between each other, so they. Well, I noticed that Pauline Collins had a This Is Your Life in 1972, and he had to wait till 1974 for his This Is Your Life.
Oh, bless. But no, he's a very versatile actor. We don't see enough of him these days.
Yeah. I would have thought that 72 and 74 was a bit early for both of them to be having their This Is Your Lives, but there we go.
Yeah, because when she did Faceless Ones in '67, she was very much up and coming. She wasn't established.
So this just proves that when X Factor singers and various celebrities have their autobiographies within 3 or 4 years of being famous, it seems like even in the 70s, people were being celebrated quite early on in their careers. So.
I think 72 barely allows for upstairs, downstairs, doesn't it? I mean, but no, I remember. I do remember the surgeon.
Yeah.
I remember him eating. I remember somebody swallowing something, but until I saw the DVD, I'd forgotten the finer details.
Yeah.
I too remember thinking, oh, so they haven't exhausted the Roald Dahls after all, and being disappointed that Roald Dahl himself didn't introduce it.
I will say
they did all that in recording blocks.
Yeah, I will say that it may be season 9, but the lady doing the dancing at the start, she looks like she's been preserved remarkably well. She's been dancing there for 9 seasons. And she doesn't look a day older than she did at the start.
Again, I'm not unknown to be enthusiastic about the female figure, but I mean, I don't. Yeah, it was just I'm just as interested in the funny little goblins and things like that. In the title, it was just a really imaginative, interesting title sequence that I think if it had gone off a bit fantastically, because the essence of Tales of the Unexpected was always it was ordinary people in extraordinary situations, which could also describe armchair thriller. But I just loved all that sort of thing, and I was hooked every year. I was hooked. I did think it probably did taper out a bit after season 5. It didn't sort of. There weren't so many good episodes coming in.
When I was watching The Moles and the Surgeon, Dealey the cat was here, and I was hoping that he was. I told him, you're going to have to dance like the lady in the title. One of the things that I like is series that run long time. Yes. I like how the title sequences change, and I'm always rather disappointed when they remain the same. And of course, it is a really good title sequence, but I still would have liked them to have done different versions of it, or somehow changed it in 9 seasons. But
they kind of tweaked it a bit because the first, I'd be interested. Can you remember, having seen it this morning, whether the beginning of it had Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected, or just Tales of the Unexpected? Because, of course, they knocked off the Roald Dahl bit once they stopped doing Roald Dahl.
Yeah.
And I remember, because he did introduce, because you mentioned, we were talking earlier about The Flypaper, which is a Series 2 episode. And by that point, I think it was still called Roald Dahl's Tales of the Unexpected. He was introducing other people's stories as well, which I liked. I think he should, it was almost as if, I liked that because it was almost as if he was giving you his blessing, or giving them his blessing.
Yeah.
So if you watched it, it's going to be all right.
I noticed. I'm a fan of Ruth Rendell. I noticed there's at least one Ruth Rendell story that's adapted, so I'm going to have to keep an eye out for that one. There's probably more than one, to be honest. But I was wondering, do you remember we have covered one other episode of Tales before, and that was in memory of someone. Do you remember us doing that?
Oh, do you remember? Oh, of course, My Lady Love My Dove. Yes, that's the one we want. Yes, I remember again. That's a fun one, but it's what's nice about it is it's fun, but it's got the spite of that Roald Dahl always got into his stories. So Lady Stritch, Lady Stritch and Shane were a great combination, great lines, and I do remember reviewing that. It's one of my favourites because it's one of my favourites of the non-sinister ones. But again, the actual idea is in a way sinister, but it's having fun with it, and good stuff.
Well, listeners, I think it's time for us to go, but we've enjoyed looking at Tales again. Maybe we'll do this again, or maybe one of the other contributors will look at Tales, but plenty to plenty to look at anyway. And don't always go for the really famous ones. They're great, but there are other little gems literally hidden away if you swallow them in a glass.
Absolutely. I have to say, on a final note, an end twist, if you like, with watching, it did take me a little while to get. I think it's the penultimate season, which has so many American episodes in, and I must admit, there was an American episode about a hitchhiker, not The Hitchhiker, which was the season 2 one, but about a serial killer. And that was, I really enjoyed that one. I didn't see the twist coming, which was nice. Yeah. I probably should have done, because it's probably bloody obvious if some people, but I didn't see it coming. So that's a good one. Yeah, I must watch that sometime with you.
Yeah. Okie dokie. Right, we gotta go. We'll be back again soon. Bye bye for now.
Okay. Hurrah. Bye.
Oh, darling. Oh, aren't you clever? Oh, after all these years. Oh, you really do deserve it.
That was episode 49 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Martin Holmes, Toppie Smellie, Paul Chandler and Nick Goodman.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The script for Crown Court, The Most Expensive Steak in the World, was by David Fisher.
And the producer was Quentin Lawrence. Coming in episode 50 of Round the Archives.
Why don't you come and get it? Naughty, naughty!